Welcome to Big Business This Week. I'm JD Durkin here on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It has been, to say the least, another very busy week in the world of media. Big media news, of course, including Disney paying Comcast to gain full control of Hulu, as well as the splitting up here of Warner Brothers and Discovery. Plus, all the big announcements we learned at Apple's WWDC 2025 event. And joining us this week on the show to help us break it all down is Christopher Zara. He's senior editor at Fast Company. Christopher, great to have you for the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks for having me on.
So we got to talk about what happened with Warner Brothers and Discovery. From where you're situated, Christopher, what do you see as being the main reasons here for this decision from David Zaslav and co. announced a few days ago?
Well, first of all, I want to say I just can't get enough of this topic, not just Warner Brothers Discovery, but the whole evolution of television in general, because I've been following it for a long time. What's happening now is this was a company that got together about 3 years ago, and they was Warner Media merged with Discovery Inc., and they created this sort of conglomerate of television and entertainment, and now 3 years later, they've decided that they're going to be better off if they split up. So the big headline is that they want to separate the cable TV assets from the streaming and the studio assets. So that's basically what they're doing, and they're doing it for a lot of reasons. I think investor pressure is probably the main reason. Their stock has not done especially well as a combined company. And so they're pulling this trigger. I think a lot of people expect that they would pull the trigger. I think the timing has surprised some people, though.
What was the writing on the wall to a lot of others that maybe saw this move happening here at some point this year?
Well, the stock price not doing especially well, I think, would be one. Just recently, as you mentioned, the CEO and some other executives had their pay package voted against. Shareholders essentially rejected their really big pay packages, which was not a binding vote, but it spoke loudly, I think, to the idea that people aren't happy with the way the company is being run in a lot of ways. And the writing on the wall, I think, is that cable TV is not the future anymore. It still makes a lot of money, but everyone knows streaming is the future. So what you want to do when you're running a big company like this is you want to say to investors and to Wall Street, look, we're focusing on the future. So we're going to put all the streaming assets in one bucket. And it's a good bucket. I mean, they also have the intellectual property in there. They have Warner Brothers as part of that company. So that's a big deal. Warner Brothers is having a great year with its movies. It has Sinner. It has the Minecraft movie. It has Superman coming up. So it's a big, it's a big deal. Plus HBO. I mean, I think that having that along with streaming, that makes that an exciting company.
Who are the big winners of this deal, and is it rival streamers? Is it other competitors in the space that had maybe somewhat been hoping, Christopher, that this would be the eventuality for Warner Brothers Discovery?
Yeah, good question. I don't know who the big winner is. I think that we still have to wait and see. There's some details that we don't know yet, and I feel like we're going to get to a point where streaming is going to have to make serious money, and it may never make serious money in the way that cable TV did. So in the short term, the big winner is the CEO. He looks like he's doing something. They all look busy. But what this looks like in a few years, nobody knows. I mean, if you had predicted 3 years ago that they'd be splitting up already, I think a lot of people would have said, that's what's the point of even getting together if we're just going to split up 3 years later. So I'm not really sure who the big winners are.
Yeah, you mentioned the live sports component, Christopher, and I'm remembering the New York Knicks playoff run here in New York City because David Zaslav was right there on the who could forget? David Zaslav was right there courtside for so many of those Knicks home games. He was sitting alongside the likes of Larry David on one side, he'd have John Hamm on the other. He's kind of in that little celebrity row, and TNT Sports is kind of the big sports part of this.
Yes.
And it kind of transitions into the next issue we're going to talk about, the next topic of the week, which is Disney finally completing its Hulu acquisition. Despite the broader challenges you see with the legacy cable landscape, help our audience better understand how important that live sports component is and why it's always been such a sticky differentiator either for the Warner Brothers side or now, of course, for ESPN and the Disney side of things. Live sports still has a pretty unique staying power, doesn't it?
For sure. It really does. It's probably, you could argue it's the only reason to have live TV anymore, along with award shows. I have to mention that the Tony Awards just had, their best audience in 6 years. And I watched it along with a lot of people over the weekend. Sports is obviously a big part of this when you're talking about linear TV. It's how when they make deals with the distributors, these companies use sports as their leverage, right? So the deals always happen to come up when there's a big sporting event happening. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you wanted to watch a big game and all of a sudden your cable company was telling you, sorry, the channel's gone. There's these big carriage disputes that happen. That's because sports matter a lot still, and you could argue it's really the main thing that matters when it comes to live TV. News, not so much anymore because there's just so many places to get it. And award shows are great, but there's only a few of them that really matter every year. So sports is the big thing.
One of the other challenges, and maybe it's just unique to this year, that I wonder if it gave a little bit of an extra boost to the Tonys broadcast success, was the fact that it was kind of tagged up against what is historically a bit of an unpopular NBA Finals. And I don't mean that out of any disrespect to the two teams playing, but you don't have what's perceived to be by many people the biggest market teams. You don't have a team from Miami or New York or Los Angeles playing. You have Oklahoma City and you have Indianapolis, Indiana playing. Two amazing teams, they deserve to be there, but we've seen from ESPN that there's a bit of a pullback year over year from last year's finals featuring Boston, and I wonder Sunday night on the 8th how many people were like, I'm not that into this year's NBA Finals, I'm going to head over and watch the Hamilton reunion, which was awesome, by the way. Overall.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of reasons to watch the Tonys, even if you're not a hardcore Broadway person. It was a great season, and so you have that competing with what you just described as a sort of a niche sporting event almost, because you didn't have the big teams playing. So yeah, I'm not surprised that those two kind of competed a little bit.
Yeah, on the Disney end, Disney has been in pursuit of this final 1/3 tranche of Hulu. And really in the final analysis here, it appears to me, Christopher, they're really getting away with Bob Iger's able to pay billions of dollars less than NBC Universal had historically wanted for that stake. Why do you think that Hulu acquisition all the way through is so important to Disney's strategy, aside from the parks and aside from everything else we know Disney to be involved with?
Yeah, bundling. I think that they want to recreate cable TV in the streaming world, and how you do that is they bundle Disney Plus with Hulu and ESPN, and you have what really looks like the old school cable world, where everything got bundled together, and you get a better price for all these different things. So I think they're just trying as hard as they can to recreate that kind of a bundling strategy, and the more assets you own, the easier that is to do. I find it a little bit of a shame because in the original prospect of Hulu, if you remember way back in I think 2007 when it started, it was a joint venture, and there was this idea that you were going to get all of your TV on one streaming platform. Maybe you'd have Netflix and Hulu, and that would be it. And that's not the world anymore. The promise of that streaming, the magic of streaming where everything was going to be right there, it hasn't played out that way. We're having to subscribe to so many different services just to watch what we want.
What I remember from the early days of Hulu, Christopher, the reason I loved it was I was in college at the time. I was a huge Seth MacFarlane fan. I was getting into animation myself, and I remember that Seth MacFarlane was part, because originally it was sort of this venture with NBC and Fox. Now, obviously, this is before Fox's later acquisition into Disney. But to me, it was a place where you could go, and I said, I could watch all these great NBC shows, and I also have the Seth MacFarlane Fox programming, American Dad and Family Guy, and it really seemed to be at the time this was so different, and I had that sense for quite some time, at least back then.
It was great, yeah.
Cool, this is one place I could go to, and obviously the landscape's been fractured since.
Yeah. It is kind of a shame because the technology exists. It's really about how do the companies leverage and make money on it. So this is where we are, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Especially now that you have a lot of these services, including ad tiers, which are only going to become more and more prevalent. So you're going to see a lot more commercials on these services. And the premium without the ads is going to just get more and more expensive. So yeah, I'm not hopeful that it's going to get better for consumers in a lot of ways.
What does this mean for positioning, this acquisition, relative to the Netflixes and Amazon Primes of the world?
Well, it's good for Disney. You know, they can make the case now that they are really like second to Netflix, maybe. I mean, it's Netflix is still the leader, is still seen as the leader, and they actually do make a lot of money, but they're also international in a way that like some of these other streaming platforms are not. So Disney comes out looking pretty good here with this completion of the Hulu buy.
Yeah, we're seeing Netflix, meanwhile, make a lot of investments into new production facilities. They're all over the New York area. They got a new exciting property popping up down by the Jersey Shore. We just heard the Netflix CEO talk about that this week. I do want to ask you about Apple's WWDC event.
Yes.
What were your big takeaways? I think we saw a bit of a mixed reaction, I would argue, from longtime Apple enthusiasts and even shareholders of the stock. Was there some sense that maybe people were hoping for a little bit more or something a little different out of Cupertino?
Yeah, I think people kind of saw what a lot of people saw was Apple released this, what they call the liquid glass operating design language, I guess they call it, which is this sort of uniform design look that has this kind of like new depth to it. It feels like a lot of bells and whistles for something that people already kind of like. Like I like the way my iPhone already looks, so I don't necessarily want it to change. But this was like that liquid glass thing was the biggest thing that they really announced. And then there just wasn't a whole lot of like AI. They didn't make it about AI completely, and I think that probably is what turned investors off a little bit, because investors just seem to want to hear about everything these companies are doing with AI. It's been like nonstop. Like with Google, they had their big event a couple of weeks back, and it was all about AI.
Yeah, they certainly made a big splash with the, we've seen the VO clips kind of pop up all over social media.
Oh my God, yeah.
How does this compare? Remind me how this year's WWDC compares to announcements from the previous year. Was last year quite a bit more AI focused, maybe what people wanted to hear in the short term?
They had because they had Apple Intelligence. Like that was a big. Like I don't feel like Apple Intelligence probably has not lived up to the promise that Apple said it would, as of right now. And of course, there was this whole thing with Siri. Has not really. There was a new AI version of Siri that they were going to release, and then they didn't because they said it wasn't quite ready. So that was a stumble. But I feel like the last few years with Apple, it just hasn't been. It's not like it was like 5-6 years ago when when Apple did one of these events, like the whole world felt like it was shifting underneath us. I mean, they did the Vision Pro, the headgear, the VR headset a few years ago as well. And that's not like a mass consumer product. It costs like $3,000, and it's just not something that everyone is gonna buy. So it's not changing the world in the way that the iPhone did. And I don't know if they'll ever do that again. It's Apple. I wouldn't count them out, but it's I think that's probably why it feels a little bit more lackluster when they do an event like this.
Yeah, and of course the company is uniquely challenged in this tariff-heavy environment with a lot of uncertainty. Dan Ives, Wedbush Securities analyst, he's frequently cited here on Wall Street covering Apple. He likes to say Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, is 90% CEO, 10% politician. So this year's announcement is coming at a time when, because of where the components of all these Apple products come from, they're already facing a ton of tariff-related headlines that I'm sure they don't want. And I think, Christopher, the big irony on the AI side is that so many people are using Apple products to access other AI products, right? We use our Apple computers to access OpenAI, to play with Perplexity, to mess around with Notebook LM from Google. So we're sort of still using Apple products, but I don't know if we've quite integrated or figured out Apple's stake in the AI game. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, in fact, I was just thinking that same thing earlier. I mean, it really does reinforce how Apple is, it's a hardware company. I mean, it's obviously not just a hardware company, but its hardware is what people really associate it with. And as you just mentioned, like there are some companies doing AI in ways that are really changing the way we interact with the internet. I mean, Google is turning itself into a chatbot. I mean, it's going from a company that used to let you access the internet to a company that feeds you the answers with AI, and that's only going to continue. And that's a real change for a lot of people because Google's like the front page for a lot of us when we sign on. And then OpenAI's ChatGPT, it was something no one had heard of just a few years ago, is now like one of the most popular pieces of software out there. So yeah, I mean, Apple's not in the conversation in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, I'd love to get your take here. I mean, my goodness, this story between Elon Musk and President Donald Trump, it shifts by the day. Best friends turned enemies, now kind of frenemies, and maybe we can reconcile. Let me just start with your top takeaways of what we've seen. Obviously, there is a real, and last Thursday we saw this, there is a real market implication when this happened. We see uncertainty in Tesla stock that tends to drag down the broader S&P 500 with it. It's such a heavily market capitalization weighted stock. But what do you make of the back and forth from what you've seen, Christopher?
Yeah, so I guess the most recent update was that Elon Musk he did apologize essentially he sent out a tweet or a post on X where he said he regretted a lot of what he said about the president. Now, I think what you just mentioned about the market reaction to all this, I think that probably had a lot to do with it. I think even Elon Musk just doesn't have endless appetite to watch his stock drop in the way that it does. When he does this kind of stuff. So there's pressure on him, and in the end he has to answer to those Tesla shareholders, and they don't like this. They want to see that the value of their stock go up. And yes, last week when he was tweeting about Trump, like we saw how significantly that impacted the Tesla stock in one day, and there was all these threats about like contracts being taken away that he relies on, that the company relies on. So he probably did a bit of thinking and realized, like, this is not sustainable for me as a business person.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what happened, but I guess that, yeah.
Well, I know, and I don't know that very many people do. Not to get too much into the politics of this, but I'd have to imagine, the Republican Party, they're trying to pass this budget reconciliation bill, what the president calls his so-called one big beautiful bill. But politically, Elon Musk emerged as such a crucial figure virtually overnight, right? Because in previous election cycles, we really weren't hinging on the money from Elon Musk or his outsized influence in terms of grabbing media headlines. But he really changed the conversation for this last election, and I don't know that there's many people who said the Republican Party's success last November was not large in part because of Elon Musk's influence, his prevalence on the campaign trail. And I'd imagine for his companies, Christopher, he still really has to rely on the federal government for these contracts, not just for Tesla, but for the SpaceX's and the Neuralinks and the Boring companies of the world.
Sure.
I mean, Musk's ecosystem, his empire is very closely linked with the federal government.
I don't think you could operate in space without being somewhat involved, having the federal government somewhat involved. So yeah, SpaceX obviously has a lot to lose here. I think it's interesting also that, Musk could hurt Trump in a lot of ways. Like, as you just mentioned, his influence. He could spend his money in ways that could do a lot of damage to the party if he wanted to. So I think there's a lot to lose on both sides. I think that's why a lot of us found this whole back and forth so interesting, because everyone has their opinions about who has the leverage. But it does seem like Trump has the ultimate leverage here because, Musk had put out that tweet. I wasn't expecting that. I really wasn't. Like, it's not like him.
Finally, Christopher, what is one story in the world of business that you think we should be paying a little bit more attention to these days?
Well, as we go back to Warner Brothers Discovery, I just can't get enough of that story and the future of TV. It impacts how we access our entertainment and how and what we're going to be able to see on our screens, on our big screens, our little screens. So that's a story that's worth paying attention to. I find it really fascinating to think that cable TV is now going through what print media went through a few years ago. It's in decline, and it still makes money, but for how much longer, no one quite knows.
Christopher Zara, senior editor at Fast Company. Awesome conversation. Very grateful for you taking the time to join us here on Big Business This Week. Christopher, thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks for having me.